I'll introduce you. Good evening, everyone. Hello, welcome. Welcome to Pasadena Playhouse. I'm Sheldon Epps. I'm the artistic director of the Playhouse. Thank you for coming. Wonderful to have you here. Happy holidays, everybody. This is the continuation of a very vital conversation that began several months ago with a panel at East West Players under the auspices of Mr. Tim Dang, who is also one of our panelists this evening. And Tim and I went to SDC Foundation and said that we would like to continue this conversation and continue this conversation through the eyes of the director and artistic directors and move forward in the conversation to some positive answers and some action for greater diversity in all of our theaters and in the American theater. So we welcome you here for this conversation. And I'd like to introduce you to the executive director of SDC, Ms. Laura Penn.
Thank you, Sheldon. Good evening. Thank you all so much for coming indoors on such a beautiful night. I'd like to say thank you to Sheldon, to the board here at the Pasadena Playhouse, to their extraordinary diversity committee. Thank you for hosting this evening. I want to thank Tim Dang, who, as Sheldon said, was instrumental for really getting us all here this evening. The LA Stage Alliance, Directors Lab West, and of course to Ellen Risconi, who's the producing director of the SDC Foundation, who makes everything we do possible. SDCF was founded in 1965 and to this day is the only organization dedicated to directors and choreographers in this country to support their craft and the advancement of their careers. For 50 years, our goals have remained unchanged. Two of the many goals include to increase the awareness of the value of directors and choreographers' work and to convene around issues affecting these artists. And that's what brings us here this evening. We hope this evening will be a beginning, and by this we don't mean to imply a beginning for a field conversation about diversity, but for SDCF and for SDC. Although internally and between and amongst ourselves, the discourse about diversity has been going on for decades. The directors and choreographers have been engaged in this conversation for years in the four corners of our country. But a beginning tonight for a specific conversation about the full range of the impact that directors and artistic directors can have and do have on this evolution in our field. We hope that our panelists and our audience will leave this evening having heard, thought, or considered something new or different. Some of us have been in this room for a very, very long time, weary of having to repeat ourselves, or inspired around a new energy for this work. Some are newer for any number of reasons, including birth order. Some participants live with the challenge of diversity day in and day out with an all too deep understanding of what that means. Others find themselves with motivation to dig deeper into their own experience or lack of on this topic. While the issues of diversity are age-old, much of the conversation in the American theater can be traced back to the late 80s. With the exception of a few adventuresome spirits such as Zelda in the 60s, when Arena Stage tried valiantly to diversify their resident company, or of course Joe Papp, whose work sits in the forefront of so many of our minds. We would be remiss to not look at larger societal markers when we think of this work. And one of those markers was the publication of Workforce 2000 in 1987. Everything began to shift. In corporate boardrooms and businesses across the country, everyone started to talk about multiculturalism and EEO and compliance issues. Affirmative action came under attack. Working Mother magazine appeared just as Ms. was waning. Retail and entertainment began to think about the buying dollars of those beyond the white middle class, which was beginning to head for a decline. Workforce 2000, and I quote, explored, among other things, improving the dynamism of the aging workforce, reconciling the needs of women, work, and families in the workforce, and integrating blacks and Hispanics fully into the workforce. Among many topics that were also explored, there was a prediction that the distribution of wealth in our country would lead to serious social unrest. In the months that followed this publication, there was Miss Saigon. We remember how that rocked our world, this piece of our world. And yet it would be many, many years before the commercial theater sector began to understand the economics of issues around multiculturalism. After heated and passionate meetings, and the non-traditional casting project was born. Equity started requiring hiring stats, and the nonprofit theater committed to doing that. The commercial sector followed. We all hired diversity trainers. Many hired someone on staff, at times marginalized, to handle that work, that diversity work. And some things got better. Sheldon became an associate artistic director at the Old Globe. Some things changed. Some funders did good work, others not so much. The NEA began to ask about impact. And while many thought that was good, some felt that a more explicit call for multiculturalism was needed. And then we got used to it. Applying for and hoping for the big grant became the norm. Outreach and education programs became the home of our diversity initiatives. And yet, things on our stages did change. We all programmed a Black play in February, some even an Asian play in May. We celebrated Day of the Dead. Well, some of us did. And then August Wilson spoke at Princeton in 1996. And for a brief time, the discourse broke through loudly. And race, not multiculturalism, not diversity, but race was on the agenda. And we worried about diversifying our audiences, our boards, our staff. And then came the dot-com bust, 9/11, Enron, 2008 market crash. And well, while great, great work has happened between now and then, at least in the last couple of years, this conversation has gained momentum again. We realize today that while women make up 51% of the population, 20% of the jobs in Broadway and off-Broadway go to women. Today, in many of our communities, people of color already comprise the majority and yet are woefully underrepresented. We all know it's time. In less than 20 years nationally, whites will be the minority. It's about compliance, it's about doing the right thing, and it's about business. And we aren't here to discuss all of that. Although many of us know how hard it can be to separate a thread from a tapestry, tonight we're going to try. Tonight, through the eye of a director and artistic directors, these central artists who each and every day are in the middle with the capacity to impact maybe the broadest range of collaborators. So here we are, a forum to explore the current state of diversity in Southern California. What's working? What aren't we doing? How can we work together to increase diversity in Southern California theater? It's my pleasure and privilege to turn this over to the remarkable Michael John Garcés. Artistic Director of Cornerstone is how many of you know him. He's also an executive board member at SDC with a rich and varied career as a writer and director, which has taken him around the country, indeed around the world. So here's Michael, and here comes our panel.
Thank you. Y'all guys, if everybody could come out, that'd be great. So I'm just going to reiterate a couple things that Laura was saying. We're really interested in looking at this topic through the lens of the director and of the artistic director, where directors can impact diversity, where artistic directors can impact diversity, where the limits of their power are, where the limits of what they can do is. And I also want to look at and talk about the diversifying the pool of actual directors. I'm interested in that conversation. Interested in how we have this conversation in the context of a really, really competitive business in which a relatively small percentage of people are working at any given time, and how we talk about diversification within that and what we mean by the word diversity. This is not the conversation at all. It's a conversation, and just want to reiterate that, and hopefully we'll spark some stuff moving forward and inspire further conversation, inspire action, inspire change is what I hope in the short and long run. I'm really excited to be here with these amazing directors and artistic directors to have this conversation. The way we're going to sort of structure this is our panel is going to speak for about 45 minutes. We're going to try to keep the conversation relatively casual as opposed to people, answering questions one by one or, prepared remarks or anything like that. Just have a more casual conversation in this very, very large and not so intimate space at this particular point in time with a pit between us. I know people were encouraged to move forward. I do encourage people to move down. You won't, but I'm encouraging you. That's all I can do. And try to keep it organic, and then we're going to open up the, we'll see, and then open up the conversation for people to ask questions. I'm going to ask people to enter it with the spirit of curiosity. I'm going to ask people to formulate questions that are open-ended, so that we can have a conversation, so that we can really dig down into what's going on here. I encourage people to expect to be offended. I think that's what we're going to be doing here, and to work through that. You know what I mean? And still try to be open to this conversation. We're coming from a lot of different places. We're going to use the wrong words, and we're going to say the wrong things, and we got to work through that and actually have a conversation if we're going to make change happen. At least that's my opinion. You can disagree, and that's what the public comments are for. If you stand up to have a manifesto or make a long statement, I'm going to cut you off. So that we can, we're not going to have that much time. I'm going to have as many people have a chance to speak, and I'm going to stop speaking in just a second, and make it a real conversation. All right. So before we get started, you guys have a program, but I'm going to ask folks to go around and just say who you are. Again, I'm Michael Garcés, and I'm the artistic director of Cornerstone Theater Company. And thank you very, very much for coming. It's really exciting to see such a great, diverse group of people here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tim Dang. I'm the producing artistic director of East West Players.
Hi there, I'm Seema Sueko. I'm the incoming associate artistic director at the Pasadena Playhouse and the exiting founding artistic director at Mo'olelo Performing Arts Company in San Diego.
Hi, Christopher Ashley, artistic director of La Jolla Playhouse.
I'm Marc Masterson, artistic director at South Coast Repertory.
I'm Jessica Kubzansky. I'm the co-artistic director of the theater at Boston Court.
I'm Barry Edelstein. I'm the artistic director of the Old Globe in San Diego.
Hi again, Sheldon Epps, soon to be working for Seema Sueko.
Michael Ritchie, Artistic Director, Center Theater Group.
Without any further ado, I'm wondering if we can just jump in by talking a little bit about what a director does, to contextualize this conversation, and just talk about, in your context, I'm going to say that word a lot, what a director does and how their decision-making process impacts what's going on at the theater, both on and off stage. Anybody want to jump in?
I'll start because I'm not a director, and I think most of the panelists are. So for me, the director on a show is actually the critical linchpin into what the show will be about as it takes the leap from the page to the stage. And that's generally who I have my primary conversation with about the thrust of the show. Since I don't direct, even in my role as artistic director, I don't necessarily have that authority or experience to direct, to direct through the director. So for when I'm hiring, after I've chosen whatever the play is, the next, and actually it's linked together, the next important decision is who the director is. And ultimately for me, they're the ones that I'm having the conversation with about the ultimate production.
Does anybody have a different perspective on that or anything to add? Okay, cool. I'm going to move it on. Diversity. What do we mean by the word diversity? What is it? When we're talking about this word, it's loaded, and people use it a lot, misuse it, arguably. What does the word diversity mean to you?
I'll start that.
Thanks.
I think that in diversity, something is conjured in a visionary's mind, and for a lot of us, we're artistic directors or directors, in terms of how are we going to tell this story, and who are we telling this story to? And I think it's very important to be very inclusive of who your audience is. And I'm really happy that we have the Southern California artistic directors here, because I think that Southern California is ground zero for the rest of the country in terms of what the face of the future of America is, because the face of the future is now. I had just read something in a grant application that East West Players applied for, was that 91% of LAUSD are now youth of color. And are we, as artistic directors, do we have that in mind in our vision for the future? Because that's our future audience coming. Or are we heading toward a place where theater might become obsolete?
I'll just jump in and say, since you're all sitting in my artistic home, and welcome again, that diversity became important to me 16 years ago when I started this job, because I would walk around Pasadena and walk around Old Town and see an incredibly diverse and vital and interesting community. And then, to be quite honest, I would come to my theater and sit in the courtyard and frequently be the only person under 60 and the only person of any color entering the theater to see a play. And that was appalling to me on many levels. First of all, it meant that the audience was dying off, frankly, and that, you know, if I didn't do something about that, I might not have a job in 7 or 8 years. But also, I was just appalled that the richness of the Pasadena community, the richness of the Los Angeles community, and the Southern California community was not being reflected on this stage in any way, and certainly was not being reflected in the audience that was coming to this theater. So on many levels, it became primary to my mission at this theater to change that and to shake it up.
I would say for me that you used a word earlier, Michael, curiosity. And for me, it begins with curiosity, that I'm curious about the human condition. I'm curious about what it means to be a humanist. I'm curious about the community that I live in and how the organization, as Sheldon said, that I'm involved with is engaging in that community, or to a certain extent reflecting that community. And so it's a never-ending process of just being curious. And I think curiosity, with that comes a certain kind of openness and not knowing the answer to things. So if I can put myself in that mindset, I think I may do a better job of reflecting what's around me in all sorts of ways.
I think one of the things that's interesting about both directors and artistic directors is they have a unique ability to throw a party and to invite people to come together. And throwing a party that looks enough like America is, or looks enough like the community that you're producing in, is a really important and difficult thing to do, particularly for artistic directors, because like directors invite a cast together and a creative team, artistic directors also have a staff to build and a board to build and an audience to build, and throwing that party so it has enough difference in it is important and exciting challenge.
I think that's a great image, and I just say the parties are better when they're diverse, you know? Frankly, with that audience that I was seeing would come into the theater, sort of sit very staidly, very quietly, appreciate the work, and perhaps nod a little bit and go away and resubscribe, which was great. But they didn't seem to be having a really good, vital time. Now they do.
Well, actually, Chris, I have I remember the story driving over here of a show that we did together when I was artistic director up at Williamstown, and I think it was your first show, The Most Fabulous Story Ever Told, and we had never met. We had just exchanged emails and a script. This was a Paul Rudnick play where 7, 8 characters in it. First act was basically the story of Adam and Eve, if it was told from a different perspective, if it was actually Adam and Steve that were in the Bible. Very funny first act. And then the second act took a turn. It was set in modern time, and it was a group of 30-something friends, 7 or 8 30-something friends at Christmas time, dealing with their own issues and their own relationships. And Chris came in for the first meeting. We talked about casting, and he said to me, just for the record, I want to cast this show as if they were my friends coming over to my apartment for dinner. So it's going to be racially mixed. And that was all you said. You and Paul were there. There was no discussion of why, how. You just wanted it to reflect your life because they were your age. And we set out from that point without any further discussion. And it was clear to me that that was the world we were living in. We're all living in that world, and certainly the next generation even much more so, where not only our stages and our audiences, but our lives reflect that. And that was one of the initial times that I had a director that just took it upon themselves and said, this is what I'm doing. It was it turned out to be a terrific production as well.
I was really proud of it, although I was thinking that one of the black actors in that show and I, when we would walk down Williamstown streets, lots of people would cross the street because they thought they were going to be mugged. It was kind of extraordinary, actually. Like, it was not me. But the sort of clash of that cast and that like residential community was ongoingly interesting.
Funnily enough, also given because it's the home of Williams College, which is one of the most liberal, diverse colleges around New England.
What are you finding about that, Barry? Because you're new to your community, and San Diego is such an interesting community. How's that affecting your choices?
Yeah, I'm learning the city, and I'm learning who lives there, and I'm learning who wants to participate in the arts, who's being given the opportunity to participate, who are experiencing obstacles and barriers. I think about it in terms of what the art that we're all working so hard to make is actually there to do, and it's to provide a forum in a civic sense for people to come together in rooms like this and think together for a little while about whatever issues the story is presenting. And so that has to be a vital two-way exchange. It can't be that the story is living in some kind of vitrine. And the way I think about the Globe is that, this is a great, huge institution. The Globe's the second largest theater in California. Michael's is first. And we're the biggest arts institution of any kind in San Diego, which is the 8th largest city in the country. And we stand in Balboa Park, which is in the middle of the city, public land. We receive public funds. A lot of our work is about Shakespeare, which is a writer in the public trust. And the publicness of the work means that it has to be available to the widest possible spectrum of who lives in the city. And as Chris rightly says, as the artistic director, there are a lot of different groups that I'm trying to put together, a board, an audience, artists, writers, directors, even students, because we have a training program at the Globe. And the work seems to me to make sure that at every level of that institution, it's transparent and it's open. And wherever there are barriers to anybody participating, we're working to take them down. And I'm new and I'm just discovering like where the keys are and where the light switches are half the time, But like you, I have the same experience of walking up to the plaza, and I live in South Park, which is a very, very diverse part of San Diego, and I walk around and I see a real mix of people on the streets and in the stores. Then I get to Balboa Park and I see people who don't reflect that same mix of San Diego, And so you'll have to tell me what you did that worked because
I hired me.
Yeah, well, okay. So I'll be bringing Jews in, I guess. That'll help. Check.
Seema, you're from San Diego, and you ran an arts organization. You're the founding artistic director of an organization there, and now you're here at Pasadena Playhouse. And what is diversity, both in San Diego in the context of a small organization and here in LA?
Well, I think to me the word diversity is, well, it's actually always been a core value. And for Mo'olelo Performing Arts Company that I co-founded, it was actually a lot of the reason why we founded the company. When I first got to San Diego, I recognized that there wasn't enough work opportunities for actors of color, and that the audiences weren't reflective of the diversity of San Diego. And so I thought, and I had been working as an equity actor, and I thought, well, I could sit around and bitch about this, and I'm pretty good at that. Or I could try to see, is it possible? Can you create a small company that says, first and foremost, we pay equity wages to local actors. We are deliberate to select plays that offer significant roles for actors of color, and that we are deliberate to select plays that allow us an opportunity to engage communities that are traditionally underrepresented or uninvited to participate in mainstream American theater. And then along with that, we developed a process called consensus organizing for theater, which has roots in social work and community building that we adapted to the theater. So, gosh, did I answer your question?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, thanks.
So what are the obstacles? We talked a little bit about obstacles, Barry, you were saying, things that you're just learning.
There's a wide range of obstacles. I mean, they're geographic obstacles. There's terrible public transportation in San Diego, so it's tough to get to Balboa Park if you don't have a car. It's also impossible to park in Balboa Park even if you do have a car. So there are just sort of the logistic geographical obstacles to getting there. Obviously, cost is an obstacle. We have a number of discount ticket programs. It's conceivable to get in for $20 or in some cases less, but by and large, the ticket prices are much, much higher. Cultural obstacles about generally feeling welcome. Balboa Park has 28 cultural institutions. It's the most remarkable place that I know in the United States, but it does have a certain kind of ivory tower vibe to it that sometimes is not so welcoming. So we're trying hard at the Globe to look at every single one of those and say, well, what can we do with ticket prices without destroying the financial model of the institution? What can we do with transportation? Can we get our work out into the neighborhoods if the neighborhoods can't get into Balboa Park? What can we program that better expresses the experience of parts of the city that aren't feeling like their experience is being reflected on the stage? Who's on the stage? All these things contribute to a sense that the institution is kind of remote. And again, the image that I come back to with my staff a lot is smashing the vitrine, getting culture out from behind glass, getting the play out from inside the snow globe. And doing that requires a huge amount of risk and invention and trial and error, and also asking folks, how can we help you get here? How can we be more relevant to you? It's a big, enormous, complicated process.
I think one of the biggest obstacles is will, intentionality, and the assumption that we are experts and know what the community wants or needs, as opposed to having a real conversation and curiosity. I don't think we should assume we're the solution to communities' problems. Rather, we need communities more than communities need us as theaters. And so engaging in authentic conversation, I think, is sort of the first step where our action should be listening.
And speaking of actions and listening, I will say I attended the last panel that Tim Dang hosted on diversity at East West Players that many of the people sitting here were a part of. And apropos of listening, discovered an obstacle that, we are constantly taking our own temperature and asking how we can do it better, and the ways in which we know we are not perfect or as good as we can be. And one of the things that gobsmacked me, and it's interesting because I had a conversation with someone where I said, well, I'm on this panel, and they're like, oh God, another panel where people are gonna sit around and talk about it and no one's gonna do anything. And I said, well, I have to say, and by extension Boston Court, were profoundly impacted by the discussion at the last panel because, and this was actually something I heard in the audience where we were talking about auditions and we were talking about actors, and somebody said, all ethnicities urged to audition, or something like that, or encouraged to audition. And someone in the row beside me was like, oh yeah, well, I never go. I never believe them and I don't go, because they don't mean it. And that was shocking and eye-opening to me, because we're like, no, we mean it, we mean it. But that opened a really interesting, a really long conversation that is ongoing at Boston Court about how we can do that better to help people understand that we mean it. That, you know, which is, and it led to a wide variety of conversations about why people don't think people mean it, whether they were specifically talking about my theater or in general. That was a really fascinating and eye-opening conversation. Had huge ripple effect. So just to say, I already feel more educated, and it sparked huge conversation.
Yeah, when we talk about diversity and diversifying, I think audiences, for sure. But I'm also interested in what are the obstacles, literally the obstacles, or what feel like the obstacles, diversifying the artist pool. You know what I mean? Like the director pool, for example. And in the context of what I believe is really true about this business is talent ultimately will out, right? I mean, we are looking to put the best possible product on stage, and product we believe in, plays that we're passionate about. How do we change, you know, it's a relatively small pool of directors of color who are working, of female directors. What are the actual obstacles to changing that?
I think there's mentorship and there's sponsorship. And I read an article where they said women and people of color are very good at mentorship, you know, sharing what it is we do and teaching. But what we're not as good at is sponsorship, and that's what the dominant culture is very good at. When you get a phone call from Tom Hall or, you know, any of the other search firms, and they say, hey, we're such and such theater company is hiring a new artistic director or managing director, are there folks you'd recommend? That conversation of those list of names that are given, there's a lot of weight in that. And I think, when I think about my own personal responsibility, it's okay, so make sure I sponsor others up. Make sure that when people ask me for a recommendation, I'm mindful of the weight that carries, and encourage others to do the same.
I'll piggyback on that because I was a person of enormous good fortune to be mentored by Jack O'Brien. Under a TCG grant, they kept me at the Old Globe for 4 years. And Jack O'Brien said to me, literally, the day I got there, you should take advantage of this opportunity to do what you want to do. You want to do Ibsen? Do it. You want to do Noel Coward? Do it. You want to do Shakespeare? Do it. You want to do August Wilson? Do it. You want to do a musical with Duke Ellington? Do it. Do what you want to do, because, as Jack would say, honey, that's what I do. I just do what I want to do. And, you know, this is the guy who, the week I got there, had just done King Lear, and the following week was going into rehearsal for Damn Yankees. So Jack gave me this face, this body, this complexion, that opportunity. That is rare in our field. Let's come out and say it. For someone, an artistic director, to offer that opportunity to a person of color was rare at that time, and unfortunately is still all too rare right now.
I do think that mentorship is very key, and especially when it comes to diversity, I think that directors that come into East-West Players, or directors who come and say, you know, I would love to direct this play at East-West Players, you know, I think that's fine and dandy that they can direct this play at East-West Players, but why wouldn't they direct this play at another theater, you know, even if it's a diverse play? I don't understand why they would only come to East-West Players to direct it with an Asian cast when they could take it to another place like Center Theater Group and direct it with an Asian cast. So I think that whole diversity issue needs to be thought about. And I think we talked about it before, Sheldon, when there was an African-American play, why not give an opportunity to an African-American director to direct that play, because those opportunities are very few. But at the same time, when you see an Asian play happening at a larger theater in the country, that play is not necessarily directed by an Asian director. And so I think there needs to be a lot more discussion about that. I don't know which is right, but again, there are those artistic decisions that we need to talk about in terms of why it is that we select a certain director for a certain play. And in East West's case, it's like, will this director be able to carry that same vision to another non-ethnic specific theater? And that's very important for a director working at East West Players.
Any other thoughts on that? Diversifying the director pool?
Barry, we were starting a really interesting conversation about, particularly in kind of classic plays, how white that directing pool is.
Well, we're talking about how to train directors. We have a wonderful MFA actor training program that we run with the University of San Diego, but there hasn't been, UCSD on the other side of town has a directing program, but the Globe isn't affiliated with one, and I feel it because we're producing an enormous amount of classic work, and it's just always frustrating how hard it is to recruit directors who've got experience, let alone diverse directors who've had experience of it. So my feeling is an institution of the Globe size can grow, can plant seeds that can grow in the same way that we're contributing actors, in the same way that we're doing world premieres of plays that then go on to life in the theater. We can muster our tremendous resources to train directors, and we've been having a series of really wonderful conversations with the universities in town about doing that. It'll take a little bit of time, I suspect, but I think that's one way to do it. The institution can throw its might behind creating, what Jack did with you, Sheldon, and say, here, we're just going to say, do it. We're going to throw the resources into creating that next generation of talent. And we're very, very seriously talking about that.
I think it's interesting that the field itself for the past 20 or 25 years, 30 years even, has focused enormously and at times almost exclusively on the playwright. On the importance of the playwright in the theater, for funding from the foundations, from boards, from artistic directors, the new play, the world premiere. The idea was to have that ownership of it, and has not looked beyond that, to actors, designers, directors. And I think one of the complications with directors that I always find is that I can read a play. I know what the playwright's written. I can see an audition from an actor, and I can imagine them in the role. I can look at a design portfolio and discuss the design. But a director, unless I've seen their work or worked with them, all I have from them is a promise. And, it may be my own self-interest or lack of being able to take that leap sometimes to say, I know you believe in your promise, I'm willing to invest $1 million of our production money in your promise without having seen you. I can't necessarily do that easily, and I think that's somewhere where the field itself could probably take some more responsibility to help shape that bridge. I find it going into this field is hard for anybody. For a director, it's nearly impossible to break through, regardless. Sex, ethnicity, age, it's very difficult to become a director in the American theater.
I also, I think one of the obstacles here is sometimes different interest groups can feel in competition with each other in not healthy ways. Like I think there's, this past year, there was quite a lot of conversation, the TCG conference and various other places of, should the conversation be about breaking the glass ceiling with gender? Should it be about race? And like, what is diversity? Who gets included in that conversation? And is it a really finite pie where there's only so much progress to be made? And I think whenever people can think of themselves not in competition with each other for progress, but that there is actually room for progress to be made in gender, in race, in age, in various different ways, and that there's a synchronicity about progress and not a competition.
Yep. So what does diverse theater look like? Like what does your theater look like if it's more diverse, or is it already there? And what does a more diverse theater look like? And how does it make your how would it make your organization better? How would it make the field better? How would it make the art better? How would it make the world better?
You know, I'd love for Marc to answer, because with no disrespect to your predecessors, and I mean that, your theater is vastly more diverse than it has been for the previous 40 years in your season and a half. So, could you answer?
Well, I would say that there has been a long effort at SCR that predates me for the Hispanic Playwrights Project, which went on for 15 years, for annual productions of Latino plays that also had one had a 15-year run, directed by a diverse director and written by diverse playwrights and so forth. So I wouldn't go down that path. But
I will.
Thanks, Sheldon.
And I guess I'm talking about on the main stage.
All right, so here's what I think about that. I think that the regional theater movement was created to serve communities, and that 50 years ago, roughly, or 60 in some cases, these institutions were built in America because there was a whole generation of people who believed in the value of art in the community. I think the idea of serving the community was different 50 years ago than it is today. And that what a community is different than it was 50 years ago, thankfully. And so that's the way I see it. You know, I was really curious when I got to SCR about, that giant mall across the street. And yet, as one of my friends said, 2 blocks down the street is Mexico. And why is it that dividing line is so stark, and that there's very little commerce of any kind? I'm not just talking about the theater, I'm talking about the community. And so I'm interested in that divide. I'm interested in trying to understand that, and to understand what it means for an arts institution to ask questions about that. I don't have the answer to that, but I can sure ask questions. And I'm similarly curious about my own preconceptions of what Orange County was before I ever got there, formed by television primarily, although really I didn't watch that much of that show, but I know that it was the birthplace of the John Birch Society, for example, and the Christian right, and so all sorts of very white images came to my mind when I thought about Orange County. And what I found when I got there was, of course, much more diverse and very different than what I thought it was. And so I started asking questions about that and commissioning writers to investigate those questions and to build relationships in the community and to use art as a way to reaching people and just opening the doors and trying to be curious about where we are. And so what does it look like? I think it looks like an ongoing kind of dialogue with that question and other questions. I don't think diversity is the only thing, but I think it's a very important thing in understanding where I live, where I make my art, and how we make our art, who we make it with.
I would just piggyback on what Marc said, because I totally agree with that. A lot of it is building relationships, and a lot of times I think theaters kind of like go through this with fear. It's almost like, okay, I have a particular vision as an artistic director, but it's that curiosity that actually keeps you going. It's like not being afraid by someone coming up to you and asking, I'm from this particular community, I would like to see my voice being, I'm part of Orange County or of, the Asian American community. And I think it's being invited and being invited to sit at the table to build that relationship, to kind of like create this pipeline, which is very important. I think a lot of us, in particular minority communities, don't have that relationship to a particular organization. And so how do you build that pipeline? How do you establish that relationship? And I think that that becomes very important. Someone then told me that you have to be careful of the gatekeeper of that pipeline. So you have to have more than just one person from one community having that access to the artistic director at the theater. So it has to become a commitment in which you are talking to a number of people who are coming in through a certain community. So that pipeline really needs to be, instead of mainstreamed, it needs to be multi-streamed.
Any other thoughts about what a diverse field looks like? What kind of diversity you're interested in specifically? Like, what do we mean?
I'd say that in the back of my mind, we have 3 theaters and we produce or present 20, 25 shows a season. So for me, we all have mission statements that probably include a very direct response to the idea of diversity within our organizations. But in the back of my mind, the phrase that I use for any given theater, season, or period of time is that because we're so big and because we have the place we have, that it's our responsibility to provide the widest range of theater to the greatest number of people with the deepest impact. And that's just my statement. It's written down nowhere. It's not on a t-shirt or anything. And as I'm going through and planning seasons or choices or artists or relationships, that's always running in the back of my mind. Are we really reaching out? And my hope is that that's sort of the light at the end of the tunnel, and then everything falls into place of what diversity means. Diversity of the style of theater. For all of this, I still remain that the actual art and craft of theater, doing that well, is, if not our primary responsibility, it's equal to all of our other responsibilities as leaders in the community. And it's my both hope and intention that that's sort of the driving motivator, and it means that you do diverse perspectives for different audiences with different artists of ethnicity, physical skills, ages, political persuasions, sexual persuasions. We're one of the few companies in the country that actually has that ability to really do that sometimes in a short amount of time. 25 shows. We could pretty much, if we wanted to go through a checklist, which we don't do, we could go through a checklist and say, done it, done it, done it, done it. I think that's the wrong approach towards programming, but I think you need to be able to look back over a period of time and say, you know what, we pretty much covered much of what we attempted to do and should be doing.
Yeah, my 25 years of my career before coming to San Diego, the constant through it has been the public theater in New York. I've had 3 different iterations of my life making contact with the public theater. First while Joe Papp was alive, then when George C. Wolfe was running the place. George used to say that he wanted the lobby of the place to look like a subway platform. And he made that happen. It's one of the great inspirations to me is what happens at the public theater, the wide range of material that's produced, the extraordinary closeness of the way the audience, the artists, the board, everybody involved in that institution match the demographic of New York City. There's a real transparency. The front wall of the building and the city of New York are just sort of permeable. And that's to me what it looks like. San Diego's version of that. If I'm lucky enough to last long enough in Balboa Park, that's what and it wouldn't be a subway platform because we don't have a subway in San Diego, but it would be, the folks that are walking through Balboa Park on a beautiful Sunday morning really look like everybody who live in San Diego. And I want to make the front door of the Globe as permeable to all of them as the rest of Balboa Park is. That's what I think it looks like, is so that the city itself merges with the arts institution with no perceptible barrier. It's just a transparency and a permeability. That's what I think it looks like. And I hope that I will be held accountable for that 5, 10 years from now and measurable in those terms.
I think also really being mindful that our staffs are very diverse and representative of the communities that we serve is important. We each, as individuals, we all have spheres of influence, associations, networks. We also have spheres of interests. And ensuring that everybody on staff is empowered, their spheres of interest and influence are empowered and leveraged, and that rather than having staff be cookie cutter to fit a job description, really allowing them to bring their full humanity to the work, and then allowing that work to then go out into the community as well. I think the staff equation is very important to achieving an authentic and honest diversity and relationship with the communities.
I think one of the crucial things here is being able to tolerate the messiness of the conversation about diversity, because you started out by saying like it's always contentious, and there's a lot of pitfalls. I was wondering, was this this visual representation of the pitfalls of the conversation about diversity? But we just started something at the Playhouse called the Leadership Council, and it's a lot of very diverse group of activists and community leaders and educators, and to go into that room and for those meetings has so much fight in it, and I think being able to say, the fight is worth having. It's okay that it's contentious. It's okay that there's disagreement, and hopefully something more productive comes out of that disagreement.
What are you curious about? I mean, what are you excited about, curious about? What are the opportunities right now? What are some of the successes you see happening in your theaters and projects you're working on, maybe outside the theater, in the field? What's exciting right now? What are you curious about? What are the things you'd like to learn?
I think I'm going to stand up and sing the Star Spangled Banner or something, but I think America's a really interesting country. And I think in particular, American cities are fascinating. And even Los Angeles. We spend we spend less time together because we're in cars all the time rather than subways and buses and all of that. But sooner or later, you run into people of another color, even in Los Angeles. And that's a great, fascinating thing to me. I would love for our work to reflect America more often within each production rather than in separate productions. And I'll say that as much for this theater and my work as artistic director as anybody else here. I, as artistic director, need to make more choices and lean on individual directors more to make that happen, so that it's within each production, as you often do, as the Globe often does in the classical work, but within each production rather than in separate productions.
That's something I'm actually really curious, because when we started this series of conversations, and one of the things that we discovered, that we realized about ourselves, is actually that, Boston Court does a huge amount of new work. And this was a really interesting discovery for us, that oftentimes the director was very open to color-conscious casting, or to mix up what a family looked like. And the playwright, whose world premiere it is, actually was frequently the one saying, no, I'm not comfortable with that, which was when we started talking about what are the questions for us about how we could improve, because I completely agree with you, Sheldon, not just about ethnically specific or a singular culture, sort of how can we reflect our community and engage the cultural conversation in all plays. That was I'm curious to hear from people about that, because one of the, I think the conclusions that we are in the middle of discussing is that probably as an artistic director going forward, one of the things that we have to do better is say to the playwrights, hey, this is really important to us. So we want you to be aware, when we are going to try to cast the play, that's going to be incredibly important, or design the play, or all the staff of the play, and see what happens. I'm curious about that.
I had an experience early on in my tenure in San Diego that was really illuminating to me about it, both positively and frankly a little negatively, which is that when the theater had programmed an entire season before I got there to help make a transition happen. One of the plays was The Rainmaker. N. Richard Nash, born as Nathan Birnbaum, which I love, but N. Richard Nash. And I thought, oh God, The Rainmaker, oh, kill me. What, who wants to see that? Why are we doing it? Oh my God. And there wasn't a director hired. So one of my first jobs as artistic director, literally like 3 weeks into the job, was I had to hire a director to direct The Rainmaker. And I thought, let's hire a woman, because it's a story about a woman coming of age, a woman finding romance. So hire a woman, hired Maria Myleaf. She did a beautiful job, brought a design team that did a very unconventional, very non-literal production, and she made some interesting casting choices. She cast Herbert Seguenza of Culture Clash as the sheriff in this Midwestern Dust Bowl town in 1930, whatever, and an actor named Benga Akinabe as Starbuck, an African-American guy, as Starbuck in the play is set in like the Oklahoma Dust Bowl or Nebraska drought something or other in the 30s, and I was really, and the audience went with it. And I thought, oh man, I got letters saying there wouldn't have been an African-American man in this town at that time, and no father would have let his daughter alone in the stable with an African-American man at that time. I got those letters, but I also got a whole load of people who came and had a fantastically wonderful time. So it was a real eye-opener for me, because the Globe's audience is very used to seeing a very diverse company in Shakespeare, but here's this very specific slice of Americana, and the audience kind of went there, and I found it tremendously wonderful and happy and positive, So, I kept the letters, the bad ones, and I answered them, and I tried to help people understand why one would make that choice. But I was really pleased by it, and it strikes me that Southern California is incredibly interesting that way, open to stuff in a way that even my beloved New York maybe wouldn't be. And that's an extremely positive thing. I look around at, for example, what's going on at the LA Phil. I mean, the work that they're doing in the community, is there anywhere in the country doing more interesting stuff? I don't know. I would say probably not. You are right, whoever said it, that the future of America starts here in Southern California. And I'm so thrilled to see how open even conservative military San Diego was to saying, we're going to look at this thing from a different point of view and have a good time. It was great.
Well, I'll add a little bit onto that. When you talk about, you don't just program, the play in the slot to line up with Martin Luther King Day, that actually it's casting across all of your shows, and talking about what we did with Chris, and sometimes it's just making the palette on the stage reflect the palette in the living rooms or the restaurants around town. There are other times when you make specific choices, and I'm turning to you because you just did it with 12 Angry Men, where you took a play that was classically written to be presented as a group of white men in a courtroom of a time. Dealing with an issue, and you cast it in a way that didn't simply say, we are going to mix it up and put people in there, but very specifically went to the roles, the perspectives, the viewpoints of those jurors and what the dynamic of that conversation and ultimately that argument was going to be, so that you added another layer to it. You actually, you know, went almost 3 steps beyond and made it a point of conversation on the stage, and I would imagine in your lobby as well. Maybe you can talk about where you came to that decision, how to approach that particular play.
Well, it grew very much out of conversations that were going on when I needed to find a play for that slot about the Trayvon Martin trial, and then really was prompted by Obama's very moving speech on race, and you know how even as president of the United States, he's still a black man in America, and but for, you know, that incredible title, he has trouble getting into an elevator or walking down the street and people not crossing the street because they think they're going to be mugged. So it was prompted by that and by my feelings about that and my experiences in those same kind of situations, and really wanting to deal specifically with these still extant issues of black America and white America. And there was some criticism for the fact that I didn't open it up and include Asian Americans and Latinos and all of that. I believe that there is a fine production of that play to be done in that way, and I hope somebody will do it, and I hope that I get to see it. That was not the choice that I was making. I was interested in that strict racial divide between black and white. And it did cause a good many conversations and some anger on the part of some of our subscribers or some single ticket buyers or whatever, including a guy who at one of our Talkback Tuesday discussions got back and said, I just want you to know that I went to Harvard and there is no racial problem in America anymore, so I don't know why you chose to do this.
And on that note,
Yeah.
I would like to open this up to some questions, if possible. So I am going to hand off my mic, I believe. Is that correct? I think people are coming down to grab my mic, and somebody else has a mic. And there is a hand up in the air. I'm going to ask people to really ask. Hola, Josefina. And I'm going to, you know, so keep it in the question place, and let's take it from there. Here you go.
Great. Hi, I'm Josefina Lopez. I'm the artistic director of Casa 0101 Theater in Boyle Heights. Our mission is to celebrate the Latino experience in America, and I created this theater in response to the lack of diversity at the Taper. And my question is, well, I wanted to add to the conversation of diversity because, you know, I'm, as a playwright and artistic director, I was just talking to another fellow playwright who's white, and we were talking about how we just assume that because we are West Coast playwrights, we're never going to go produced by the Taper and big theaters in LA because they always produce playwrights in New York. And there's kind of a discrimination that I feel that somehow East Coast playwrights, because they've proven themselves on Broadway, or they've proven themselves that they're going to get produced first, and I have to make it in New York in order to come make it in LA. So I wonder if you could address this type of discrimination, and if whether this is part of this diversity conversation, because I kind of feel like a minority as well, being a West Coast playwright who's, you know, kind of been ignored for so long. So I wonder if you can talk about that.
So your question, gentlemen.
Well, it was actually directed to me specifically, so I'll answer it. I'll start by saying it's not discrimination. Regardless of my responsibilities in my job, I also have my own personal morals, ethics, experience, and the things that guide my life as well as my job. I was lucky enough to grow up in a family at a time in a town that was as liberal as it would come in their feelings about their neighbors, and the United States. So the choices we make at that theater have nothing to do with discrimination. As specifically to playwrights in Los Angeles, we actually have a very robust program for local playwrights. And our new play development program is split into two components. One is the classic dramaturg room, and another is the new play production program, which is led by Diane Rodriguez and Malcolm McDowell. On my staff, I can tell you, very specifically, diversity of voices, particularly playwrights, is something that's discussed every single day. Now, I will grant you that if one did a calculation of the population of Los Angeles and said, how are they represented equally on our stages, we have failed that test. But I inherited a theater that has been one of the leaders in this country. Gordon Davidson was one of the greats in terms of what the regional theater meant to the community, and I inherited it, and I chose to chase that job so that hopefully I could stand on his shoulders.
Anyone else want to address that before we move on to the next question?
Question? Can I actually add? So Michael, I might either help you or hinder you in my comment. But again, I'm going back to the pipeline. Is that pipeline working for you? Is that informing you in terms of what is happening in this Southern California community in terms of the stories that need to be told?
To an extent, yes. I cannot claim absolute overwhelming success by anybody's standards, including my own. I cannot claim that. And clearly when I arrived in Los Angeles, I set a little wildfire under myself by a choice that I made about playwrights and our playwright labs, where I specifically eliminated 4 labs. One was Latino, one was Asian, one was African American, and one was for people of disabilities. It was my belief then, and I still believe it now, that those were incredible pipelines to get up to the door. You could not walk through the door based upon those programs. I looked at the number of plays that had been commissioned and the number of plays that had been produced, and it was nowhere near it should have been. I will say that when we talk about overtime, if I look back on my tenure, my 10 years at CTG, it is my expectation, although I've never done the numbers for my own theater or for any other theater, it is my expectation that CTG has probably produced more diverse plays than any other theater in the country. I could be wrong, but it's my belief in my general knowledge of what's going on across the field that we rank near the top in terms of producing for diversity.
Thank you. Question?
Hi, greetings. Tricia Cochet, independent journalist. Part of creating this diverse audience, creating the pipeline, is your outreach and marketing. And I'd like to know what advertising dollars are placed in so-called minority media.
I'll just say a lot for us. I think that, you know, we were talking about challenges before. One of the challenges that we are all facing is we have to keep these theaters open by selling a lot of tickets. And if you are a smart theater organizationally, and you know that there is an opportunity to reach out to a particular audience for a particular production with the hope that those who come to that production will continue to come to your theater, you do invest those dollars very, very carefully. And we do a lot of research to make that happen.
I think it's a great question. We invest quite a lot as well, but I would say one of the real obstacles is it's very tempting to pump all that money when you have a playwright into a black newspaper or an Asian newspaper or a Latino newspaper, when you have a show that is specifically, clearly going to appeal to that community, because you know that that advertising dollar has a much higher return on investment. The challenge for, I think, a theater is to keep an ongoing relationship with those communities, and not only go to them when you've got something that's an easy sell, but actually say, we're interested in your community and in convincing you that we're an exciting home for you in an ongoing way. And it's hard, and you keep coming up against limited advertising dollars, but it's incredibly important.
Hi, I'm Fanshin. I'm a playwright and a producer, and I want to know, for those of you who don't have a very diverse subscriber base, what have you done or what can you do to educate your subscribers that diversity in theater is important?
I don't have a very diverse subscriber base. It's overwhelmingly white, it's overwhelmingly older, and it's overwhelmingly wealthy. And so so far, and I can't say much because I'm new, I'm only in my second play that I actually picked. But here's some things we're trying to do. One is really aggressively cast as non-traditionally as we can to widen people's sense of what people look like and who's on the stage and what's possible metaphorically and literally. We just started a reading series just this weekend for the first time in the history of the globe, a series of readings, people coming and just listening to plays being read at music stands with a real focus on writers of color, and had a wonderful and enthusiastic turnout for that. And programming, outside of February, plays from cultures that are different from the mainstream culture that makes up the bulk of my audience. So the answer to your question, to the extent that it's an answer, is to try and show people that there are other ways of what is happening on stage can look like, and that the experience of going to the theater is still as transporting and as fulfilling, and in fact even more so, because slowly a different kind of audience gets drawn in to see their own experience reflected on the stage. I mean, I would say it's a long game, and there's a lot of work to do, and sort of, we're now at this point at the Globe's life talking about baby steps, but each baby step gets followed by another and another and another. So I guess the short answer to your question is we're just leaning on it and just applying pressure to it and trying to move the institution in some directions that it perhaps hasn't been before. And so far, I would say, the audience is responding in a way that I find really gratifying, and more than that, hopeful.
Actually, if I can add on to that, for the last 3 shows that East West Players has done, we've actually added something to our survey. Is, do you believe that you should see more diversity on the stages of LA? And 94% of the audience says yes. And knowing that our audience is 54% Asian and 45% non-Asian, that more people want to see more diversity on stage. And this actually started because we did a multicultural version of the musical Chess, in which we had 4 African Americans and 2 Latinos as part of the cast. And a lot of people enjoyed the multiculturalness of the show just because it was more LA, and they actually bought into an African American playing the Russian, or a Filipina actress playing the Hungarian. And so I think the audiences are ready. I don't know whether we as artistic directors are ready to let the audience enjoy or see what they want to see.
I don't think that for the majority of, say, subscribers, that race is the primary factor.
I don't know what I did. Okay. I don't think for the majority of our subscription audience that race is a primary factor. I think they're there to see a story, and if you do it in a diverse way, it's not going to be an obstacle for most people. But there are times and there are people where it is. And I'll just tell you a story. In my previous job at Actors Theater of Louisville, I was programming there in Louisville, Kentucky. The primary demographic was African American and white. You know, there weren't a lot of other communities. There were some, but not the significant demographic breakdown was that. And so I was programming 2 and sometimes 3 African American shows a year. And I got caught in the back of the theater one time by this woman who represented sort of the old guard subscriber who had been coming for many years. And she said to me, "Why do you keep programming those plays by those people? That's not who is interested. We're not interested in seeing that." And it shocked me, first of all. And then I realized, well, sometimes you just have to be willing to say goodbye. I'm not gonna worry about that. That's her problem, not my problem. And that's not the future of the theater. She was quite old, and she was disturbed. She was disturbed that things had changed, and so change itself can be threatening to people. And so if that's the reaction, then goodbye.
And can I just say, Fanchon and others who have great ideas about how to make better reaches, I would love to know. Probably not in this moment, but please see me, because frankly, it's an ongoing quest. And I don't know that we are always successful, so great ideas gladly appreciated in terms of how to make that better.
Hi, my name is Joshua Wolf Coleman. I'm a Southern California artist these days. And I think you guys just answered all the questions that I was kind of trying to form in my head for you, which was that you talked about audience, and I guess my question was bravery, the act of bravery of doing something, which is, I think you're preaching to the converted to somewhat. We're all, very few of us are Republicans here, and I think that, but I think that, like, even multiculturalism, like any phrase, drives me fucking crazy, and it feels like it's an act of bravery, certainly, to ask a African-American female director to direct Death of a Salesman, maybe in the same way that it's an act of bravery to ask a white director to direct a black Death of a Salesman, as the case may be. And those moments of, will I cast Othello as a white man? That might offend me as an actor going, well, I want to play Othello. Why are they casting some white dude when I can do it? But we have a history of white men playing Othello. We have a history of Anthony Quinn playing all sorts of different looks because he can play it. Marlon Brando plays Italian if he wants to, whatever it is. These are acts of, you can do it. It's not brave when a star does it, but I guess I'm trying to ask, how willing are you to go against even our gestalt? And in those moments, when you have a choice, do I want to do the easy thing, or do I want to actually find the best artist or find more artists? I'm a football freak, and you guys are talking about finding black directors or female directors or Asian directors, and the NFL only has it has a certain amount of black NFL coaches, and they had to do a thing for it. They have to actually make sure that a black person gets
It's the Rooney Rule. I'm a Steelers fan.
Yeah,
so yeah.
I'm a Giants fan. Exactly. But I don't know what I'm asking, but I'm asking, what is your... Yes. Thank you. Was that long? Wow.
I guess it's a question about bravery, and about not only going maybe against the perceived notions of a conservative audience, I think we talked about that. But, Michael, you talked about letting go of the labs. And I think about, some people are really pissed off about that, some people still are. And yet, it also represents a moment of bravery, a moment of looking at your theater, making a decision out of your own conviction. And so, I think that's the question, and I think another kind of bravery is saying goodbye to an audience member. Does anybody have a response to it?
You do have to be brave to do that. I had a lot of that. Usually not to me, usually to my white counterpart in the management position, would say, when are you going to stop him from doing all those black plays? in a season where I was doing 1 out of 6. But you know, we have to be brave enough to ignore the loud, ugly voice. The racist voice is loud and ugly and very scary sometimes. But there are not as many of them as there used to be, thank God. And they do need to go away. You know, anybody who has that problem as a subscriber in this theater, I really would like them to go away, because fortunately, they have been replaced by a larger audience which appreciates that view of the world. So it does still take a certain amount of bravery, because you hate to lose anybody. We're also focused on earned income and all of that. We hate to lose anybody from our audience, but some of those people, if they still have that problem in the year of our Lord 2014, they just have to go away. And hopefully this noble work that we are trying to do will replace them multifold, and I believe that it will.
Yeah, bravery is such an interesting term. I don't know if the absence of fear is the same thing as bravery. I don't know. I'm not sure they're the same. But I do know we talk a lot about not being afraid. And the basic nature of these institutions that we run causes a huge amount of fear, because, as Sheldon says, the earned income is an enormous part of it. We fear that the philanthropy that would fill in if earned income falls is not going to be there, and then suddenly people lose their jobs, and that's horrible. The last thing I want to do is see that happen. So it's that to me is the real answer to it, which is dedicating real energy and imagination to changing the system. You know, Marc's right, these institutions all sprung up roughly in the 60s or so. The Ford Foundation threw all this money into the regional theater around the United States, and the basic financial model that runs these theaters in 2014 is the same as it was in 1962. That's what needs to change, because it is the inertia of the business model that makes people like us go, I don't know if I can do it, I don't know if I can do it, and that's what creates that fear. So again, it seems to me the thing that we all have to look at is, how do we really deal with the basic model that runs these institutions that make them so resistant to change? And if we can change the system, change the process, which for me is less about bravery than it is about elbow grease. That's just hard work, and you just can't stop, you know? Because I don't fancy myself terribly brave, you know? I send my 6-year-old daughter on the Ferris wheel and I stand and watch. But I do know that fear and inertia are the enemies of progress. And those are the things we need to really, really work at.
And I will just add, you know, one of the interesting challenges, unlike most of the folks, you know, Boston Court is a much smaller house than many of these houses. And, you know, the bravery all the time is making sure that we are trying to do theater that is more challenging because we have less seats, you know, because financially it's a lot less of a risk for us than it is for any, you know, any of the people who have 800 seats in their house. And, you know, frankly, it's a constant conversation because we don't do plays that people don't walk out of. I just have to say, in the first couple of years, we were like, oh my God, they're walking out again. And now we're like, oh yeah, they walked out again. You know, you see the house manager report and it's like, how many people left at intermission? And I mean, and to be honest, it's part of, we actually feel like that's a responsibility we have, because we're trying to do challenging, artist-driven theater that gives you a unique experience in Southern California, and part of it is that we have less seats to fill, so we feel a responsibility to be brave in that way. But I just want to say that's not without fear, you know, so maybe that's about it.
Hi. My name is Reagan Linton. I'm an independent actor.
Where are you? Can you stand
I'm
up?
down here. No, I can't stand up, actually.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. sorry.
But thank you for asking. No, I'm an actor here in Los Angeles, and but that's a perfect segue into the question that I had. Michael, you're actually the only one who's mentioned disabilities tonight. And Barry, to use your example, the one thing that I do like more about Southern California, I think we're more progressive, is that all of our subway platforms are accessible to people of different abilities. So I'm just curious whether you guys have thoughts on how diverse expression of physical ability plays into this conversation.
I'll just say that it should more bravely play into this conversation. And for me, I will say that's something I need to be more conscious of and make choices that will be more inclusive in that way, both in terms of the material itself and the casting of the material. So thank you for the reminder.
In all honesty, really where we've dealt with it very specifically, and I'd say somewhat consistently, has only been in the deaf or hard of hearing community. We've had a very good artistic relationship with Deaf West, and over the years have developed and produced a number of plays, including musicals. Some very successful on an artistic and on a financial level, and some not so. But the wider range of disabilities, we really haven't paid an equal amount of attention to.
I want to talk just a bit about the power of the individual, because we've been talking a lot about institutions and sort of the very broad approach to this. I have had the pleasure of seeing, I think, Reagan in 5 different productions when you were a student at UCSD, and by how absolutely willing and interested in playing a huge diversity of parts you were, and really challenging the school, La Jolla Playhouse when we cast you, San Diego, to really think how could we cast you, and to think of you as an actor who could do any role, really transformed a lot of people's thinking about how to cast a show. So I think you had a bigger difference as an individual person on people's mindsets than I've almost ever seen an individual have, and that can be incredibly powerful.
Hi, my name is, is this working? Hi, my name is Eric Shapiro. I'm a playwright. I also can't stand up. I'm sorry about that. I've been a professional sitcom writer for 10 years, and about 2 years ago when I became injured, I wrote a pilot about my injury and being in a wheelchair and becoming disabled. There was immense fear among the networks and studios to even touch it, and a friend said, theater is much more open, why don't you adapt it into a play, which I did. And we had a very successful reading in New York. But I have kind of a reverse question, which was very interesting, that kind of popped up. I wanted to get your opinion on it. It's a dark comedy, it's autobiographical. The question was whether they should actively try and cast the role of the lead as somebody who's actually disabled. And I found it very interesting. What you were saying, as the playwright, I was extremely selfish, and I said, no, I want the best actor. It doesn't matter if he's in a wheelchair or not. I just wanted to know what the panel's opinion is about, kind of piggybacking off what this gentleman said, should traditionally African-American roles and African-American plays be kept that way? Should people in wheelchairs play disabled people? Or is it okay, as you see in television, most, if not all, of the disabled roles go to non-disabled actors?
I'm actually going through that experience right now with a play that we've been developing, actually based on a director who many years ago dove into a pool and became paralyzed. And he and a playwright friend of his, and this was a very successful director, he and a playwright friend of his have written a piece about his life. It's autobiographical. And in talking about it, that question came up. when we were talking about it. And like I've said before, with some of my conversations with directors and playwrights, I lean on them to actually be the focus of what the production will be like, knowing that I have, my own responsibility. But much like you, both the playwright and the director said, let's get Alec Baldwin and put him in a wheelchair. They didn't, and so in some ways that would allow the institution to go forward with that, and if there was resistance from outside, to have a specific answer. Certainly, if the playwright and the director had said the exact opposite, I deeply believe that this needs to be played by someone with the same disability, I would feel honor-bound to do that as well. It's an interesting dilemma, because in some ways, for certain people, it's the exact right answer. For other people that have a stake in it, it would be the exact wrong answer.
Yeah, it's an area where I think it pays to really listen and not assume anything. And I don't just mean people with disabilities. I mean that there are so many examples of ethnicity being a stumbling block, or successfully done or not successfully done when it comes to casting. And I think the reason is there are really two issues. There's an identity issue, and there's an affirmative action type of issue, And so those two things are not always in concert with each other. And I think they're different things in different communities. And so if, as artistic leaders, we can pay attention to that, we will make decisions and be absolutely certain that we're not going to please everyone with whatever choice we might make, but at least we can be aware of how those choices might be perceived and might ripple out into the community if we've done an effective job of listening.
I think we have time for one last question.
My name's Larry Carpenter. I'm on the SDC board. While the artistic director conversation is fascinating, I'd love to sort of address this to the concept of how individual directors can affect this conversation. I hear a lot about casting. I hear a lot about looks. I hear a lot about how one puts it all together. What is interesting to me is how can directors help the conversation about race, about diversity, actually inside the conversation of a play? How do they help advance the conversation for the audience within the text of a play?
I could say they have to come with a commitment. I think one of you was saying that somebody showed up and said, I'm going to cast this in this particular way, and I think the more passion for a vision of how to create a world of the play that is that director's vision that addresses that. Frankly, I probably speak for all of us when I say the most interesting thing, speaking as an artistic director, looking for directors, is to make sure that they are passionate about what they want to do, and that they really, truly need and believe in doing it. And speaking as a director myself, I try to always come from that place. So I think it starts with a passion and a commitment to it. That's probably really obvious, but just to say.
Any other thoughts about that question?
Yeah, I think you have to be willing to be annoying. Certain questions just need to be leaned on again and again and again, or the conversation will stop. And so that's part of it. Directors, I expect when I hire a director, somebody who's going to be pugnacious and fight and be demanding. And I actually love that. And I've had colleagues say to me, oh, don't hire her, she's incredibly difficult. And I go, well, that's great, because that means that I'm going to, I don't say that all the time, but just full disclosure. But, I do think a certain kind of refusal to back down on issues like that that are just much easier sort of not dealt with is part of it. And I look to directors, as Michael said, the captain of the ship of each one of those shows in my 14-play season, to be the ones who really, really keep on clanging the bell of the most contentious and challenging questions. So that's kind of how. Don't be afraid to keep on insisting that the conversation continue.
Yes, I would just add on to that by saying our art forum should do what we are doing here tonight, which is to not ignore the need for the ongoing conversation. America is in a terrible position of having convinced itself, much like that guy from Harvard, that racial issues, gender issues, our differences are not a problem anymore. And they are. So when and if you can, and if you so choose to deal with that in your work as a director, as a playwright, as an artistic director, deal with it vociferously and loudly. I said in an SDC meeting once, let's be Black Panthers about this. You know, let's be aggressive in the conversation and perhaps not so polite in the conversation, to really go in there and rough it up, because it's still a tough, heartbreaking issue in America. And it will only stop being that when we actively continue to have these conversations.
Sorry? She's being aggressive, insisting the conversation continues, so let's make that happen. Oz, yes.
I don't have a mic, and I don't think I need a mic.
Yeah.
My name is Oz Scott. I'm an African-American director. I just want to, I think one of the most, I want to say thank you to everybody who's up here. I mean, it's great that there's not a lot of Republicans in the audience, but to have a conversation with ourselves and to have, I want to say three white men up sitting up there, I think it's very important, because I want to make sure that you continue and we don't rest on our laurels. You know, I did a black play this year, so I'm cool that we're constantly, but I think the most important thing that I've heard, and I think it goes to what Sheldon did with 12 Angry Men, is that diversity is going to take the play to another level. It's about being specific as opposed to forcing the diversity on something. Every time I do a play, I want to see how I can elevate that play. And diversity can elevate plays to a different level. And what Sheldon said about, is there a Hispanic 12 Angry Men? Yes. Is there an Asian 12 Angry Men? Yes. Each one of these. So we have to be very... There's a 12 Angry Women. And 12 Angry Men. Correct. I'm being very quick. I just want to make sure that we are specific to the play, that we protect the play, that we also protect the play with diversity.
That's a great question, Oz. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Aggressive, keep the conversation going. I hear that, I feel that. I hope and believe that SDC will do its part, and I hope each one of you do. Thank you very much for this conversation. I really appreciate it, and thank you all.
Thank you, Michael.
Much. Thank you. Have a great night. Peace.